once you have the diagnosis, we want to do good shared decision-making with the patient. We want to outline all the possibilities from all of our treatments. And let's say someone has newly diagnosed cancer. Traditionally, we're using BCG, but with the BCG shortage and new therapies out there, it's a more complex discussion than what we used to have before. So can you walk us through kind of how that initial discussion goes for someone who's newly diagnosed?
Yeah, take treatment-naive, high-risk non-muscle invasive bladder cancer as kind of the index patient. I talk to them about the fact that intravesical BCG is kind of the de facto standard of care. In the era of BCG shortage, which is still tremendously impacting my practice, I don't know about you guys, but it's a big problem. I do talk to every single, high-risk patient about sequential gemcitabine. And we talk about the limitations in the data. We talk about, that it's technically kind of off-label, never been prospectively validated, et cetera. But well-annotated, well-performed retrospective studies suggest that it's efficacious, it's well-tolerated, it's cheap, it's available. And I think, oftentimes if we have enough BCG in stock, then I'll, throw it in the patient's lap and help them make a decision, kind of how they would want to approach their first line in the treatment naive setting. An obvious third choice, and we work in academic centers, is a clinical trial. And clinical trials are a little harder sell to patients in the treatment naive setting than they are in kind of a BCG unresponsive treatment refractory setting. But what I tell patients who are considering a clinical trial is basically the point of those is to either, increase the efficacy and increase our CR, or, potentially choose a treatment that has a more favorable dosing schedule, like Adstiladrin with quarterly dosing, et cetera. So, or both. Maybe the experimental therapy is both more efficacious and more tolerable. So those are kind of the three in the treatment naive high-risk setting. It's BCG, gemcitabine, or clinical trial, and we kind of walk through each of those and help the patient make a decision.
Yeah, I think a lot of us in academic centers, we tend to be lucky that we don't have an absolute BCG shortage, but oftentimes we get just a little bit. So you could give a patient BCG, but you're looking at alternatives. Gemcitabine is something that's available that most people are able to give, and clinical trials. So those are all good things to balance. We can think about the efficacy of all of these options. If you're in that kind of a scenario where you have those three choices, are you counseling patients based on how you think they're going to tolerate the treatments also between different options?
Between the different options, yeah. So I think, again, having that framework on this is a risk, this is if you do nothing, what do I expect? So say that you go on surveillance, right? What would I expect to happen? It's not what I recommend, but I still talk about it. And then you talk about the different options. You can add in biomarkers if you've got appetite for it. And I know there's going to be some discussion and podcast about that. So I do add that in. Often some patients understand that discussion around limitations right now of our current biomarkers. And some are very interested in that, in using to personalize it with the caveats it comes with at this time until we have our data from some of our recent RCTs, right? And then the other part is just practical life aspects of it, right? So can a patient come to UCSF? We have BCG. We've been able to weather the shortage, but we've done it through full dose induction, half dose maintenance. I haven't had to reduce maintenance schedules, but everybody who gets maintenance gets half dose. And with that, we have BCG to kind of accommodate for all our patients. So I do disclose that part, right? And then I disclose our experience with it in terms of oncologic efficacy, which doesn't seem to be impaired, but tolerance seems to be much better. In these last 5 years, we've been doing that. So we'll discuss that a little bit, and then we'll discuss, is that a possibility? Because some patients can't drive for 8 hours once a week for 6 weeks, and then for the cysto, and then for the maintenance. That is very impactful in terms of finances, life, just how that works in the family structure and other responsibilities, right? And so sometimes gemcitabine is available closer to home in those situations. Sometimes it's not, and BCG might be available closer to home. So I find that half of the conversation is kind of sometimes focused on some of these personal and just really practical, almost social factors, right? And we're trying to navigate structure and schedule and logistics, right? Once you pick the treatment, now how may that change or be altered by what is actually accomplished in real life? And I think that about half of some of my conversations are primarily focused on that, like how is somebody going to be able to do all these treatments? And sometimes clinical trials, depending on what you have open in that situation, may actually be easier. And that's why it's nice to have that access to that portfolio.
I'll add that, when you're having the discussion about starting induction adjuvant intravesical therapy, you have to go ahead and brace the patient for the surveillance cystoscopy regimen that they're going to have and maintenance, because we know that for high-risk disease, maintenance is vitally important in kind of maintaining that response. So, sometimes patients are caught a little off guard. They went through this rigorous induction, their scope is negative, and then you say, okay, now we're going to start maintenance therapy. And if that hasn't been broached with them, and that can be a little distressing.
Let's say you have a patient that really wants to get in the nitty-gritty of side effects. It used to be if we only had BCG as an option, we talk about side effects a certain way and a little bit of it just can't be helped. Now that we have more potential options, are you diving more into the details of all what they can expect from the intravesical therapy?
I do to some degree, but I feel like even after 15 years, I have a hard time predicting or being able to determine who's going to get those side effects. BCG has a lot of odd things that happen. I don't know how much should be attributed to it and how much shouldn't. You end up trying to figure that out with the patient as you're sort of moving through treatment. Most patients tolerate it fairly well, but there are those that definitely get some impactful side effects. We talk about, is there options to switch if they do experience those? Gemcitabine, docetaxel, most do well, but it's a long treatment. Not everyone's bladders can always handle one for, sequential medication, a catheter for at least a part of that time, or double catheterization, nor like the 3.5 hours needed to sort of accomplish that. So I think that sometimes plays into it too for BCG. Single catheterization, you can instill it. Most can go home, hold it on their own for like the 2 hours, and then kind of go about the day. With gemcitabine docetaxel, you can get close to it, to some degree, but it is a little more of time and input for those patients. However, the side effect profile is different, right? And so it can sometimes be more tolerable. You can give pre-medications with sodium bicarbonate to help, but I think it's about talking to the patient a little bit on how you'll help them manage side effects and trying to choose therapy really based on some of these other factors. So right now, it's a really long way of saying that I don't think I'm using side effect profile as much to help patients choose at this point in time. And I use some of the other things a little more, but I do acknowledge that we likely will need to help with side effects as they come. And we have a teaching sheet and some other things that kind of help patients frame what they're experiencing into terminology that we can then hopefully address and help with.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of biomarkers coming out there that might be able to predict efficacy, but the next phase, if we could predict tolerability and side effects, that would really be the home run to help select patients' best treatment options.